You just deposited your last paycheck. After 37 years, the direct deposits are over. You're standing in your kitchen looking at your bank balance, $680,000 in retirement savings, and thinking about that trip to Italy you've been postponing for a decade. Your neighbor took a $40,000 cruise the year he retired. Your sister bought a new car. Everyone says you've earned it. But there's this voice in your head asking, what if I'm making a mistake I can't undo? That voice. Listen to it. Because what you do in the first 3 to 5 years of retirement might determine whether you're comfortable at 85 or worried at 75. My name is David Harrington. I spent over 2 decades as an investment banking analyst and portfolio strategist, navigating market cycles, recessions, and financial bubbles. After stepping away from institutional finance, I now focus on helping everyday people, especially those approaching or enjoying retirement, understand money in a calm, practical way. Before we continue, a quick note. This isn't financial advice. Everyone's situation is different. Think of this as education to help you ask better questions and make calmer decisions. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why the first years of retirement are the most financially dangerous and what that means for decisions you might be facing right now. If you find this helpful, please subscribe and hit the like button. It helps others find this information when they need it most. Now here's what most people don't realize. The first few years of retirement aren't just the beginning of a new chapter. They're the most financially vulnerable window of your entire life. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because of something called sequence of returns risk. And it's the one thing Wall Street talks about in boardrooms, but barely mentions to retirees. Let me explain this simply. When you're working and saving, market volatility doesn't hurt you much. If the market drops 20% while you're 45 years old and still contributing to your 401k, you're actually buying stocks on sale. Bad years early in your career can even help you in the long run. But the moment you retire and start withdrawing money, everything flips. Now you're selling assets to live on. And if you're forced to sell during a market downturn, especially in those first few years, you're locking in losses you can never recover. You're taking shares out of your account permanently, right when they're worth the least. Think about it this way. Let's say you retire with $700,000 and plan to withdraw $35,000 a year, about 5% initially. If the market drops 25% in your first year, your account falls to $525,000 before you take anything out. Now you're withdrawing that same $35,000, but it represents nearly 7% of a smaller account. You just sold shares at their lowest value, and those shares aren't there to recover when the market bounces back. Your neighbor who retired 5 years earlier with the same amount, if he experienced that same 25% drop in his 6th or 7th year, he's fine. His account had time to grow first. He's selling from a position of strength, not vulnerability. This is sequence of returns risk. The order in which you experience market returns in retirement matters more than almost anything else. In the first 5 years, that's when you're most exposed. Now here's where this connects to overspending. You've probably heard the 4% rule, the idea that you can safely withdraw 4% of your retirement savings each year. It's not a bad starting point, but it's based on historical data that assumes relatively normal spending patterns and market conditions. What it doesn't account for is human nature right after retirement. You've been waiting decades for this. You want to travel while you're healthy. You want to help your grandchildren. You want to finally do the things you postponed through 30 years of career building. That's completely understandable. But here's what I saw during my time in finance, watching thousands of retirement accounts. The retirees who spend aggressively in their first 3 years, taking that big trip, buying the new car, helping kids with down payments, upgrading the house, often face serious problems by their mid-70s. Not because any single purchase was wrong, but because they withdrew at rates of 6%, 7%, even 8% right when sequence of returns risk was highest. Let me show you what this looks like in real numbers. Imagine 2 retirees, both starting with $650,000 at age 65. Retiree 1 decides to live it up early. He takes $50,000 out the first year for a dream vacation and new car, about 7.7%. The market happens to drop 15% that first year. His account is now at $502,500 after the withdrawal and market loss. Year 2, he takes another $50,000. Even with a modest 5% market gain, he's at $477,600. By year 5, even with average market returns, his withdrawal rate has crept up to nearly 12% of what's left. He's 70 years old and starting to get scared. Retiree 2 takes a different path. She withdraws $26,000 the first year, 4% of her starting balance. Same market drop of 15%. Her account is at $526,100 after withdrawal and loss. Year 2, another $26,000. With that same 5% gain, she's at $524,400. By year 5, she's still withdrawing around 5% annually. She's 70 years old and sleeping fine. The difference? Retiree 1 spent an extra $24,000 per year for 5 years, $120,000 total, in those early years. But that $120,000 cost him his peace of mind for the next 20 years. Because now he's forced to dramatically cut spending right when healthcare costs are rising and inflation is eating into fixed income. Retiree 2's account had room to breathe, room to recover from that early market drop, room to compound even while she was taking withdrawals. She can actually afford to spend more in her mid-70s because she was careful in her mid-60s. This isn't about being cheap or denying yourself after a lifetime of work. It's about timing. The financial decisions you make in your first 3 to 5 years of retirement have exponentially more impact than the decisions you make at 75 or 80. Here's what makes this particularly dangerous. You don't know what the market will do in your first few years. You might retire right into a bull market, where aggressive spending doesn't hurt much. Or you might retire in 2007, right before the financial crisis. You might retire in early 2000, before the tech crash. You might retire in 2021, before the 2022 downturn. You get one retirement. You don't get to run this simulation again with better timing. Now let me tell you what I learned watching this play out for 2 decades. The retirees who made it to their mid-80s with dignity and options. The ones who could afford good care, who could help family when needed, who never had to move in with their kids out of financial necessity. Almost all of them had one thing in common. They were conservative in the first 5 years. Not forever, just those first critical years. They traveled, but they didn't take $40,000 cruises. They helped their kids, but they didn't drain $100,000 for down payments. They upgraded things around the house, but they didn't renovate the entire kitchen. They gave themselves permission to enjoy retirement while respecting the mathematics of sequence risk. And here's what happened. By their early 70s, when their portfolio had stabilized and the most dangerous period had passed, they could actually afford to be more generous. They could take bigger trips. They could help grandchildren with college. They could upgrade their lifestyle because the foundation was solid. The ones who spent aggressively early, by their early 70s, they were cutting back, stressed about money, unable to help family even when they desperately wanted to. They traded the best spending years, when they were healthiest and most active, for anxiety in their late 70s and 80s. Think about what you're facing right now. Maybe you're 64 and planning that first year of retirement. Maybe you're 67 and feeling the pressure to finally do all those things you postponed. Maybe your spouse is pushing for a major purchase because we've earned it. You have earned it. Absolutely. But earning it doesn't mean the math changes. The math doesn't care about fairness or what you deserve. It only cares about the order of returns and the timing of withdrawals. Here's what I'd want you to consider. Can you give yourself a different kind of gift in these early years? Not deprivation, not sacrifice, but patience. What if you told yourself, I'm going to be moderately careful for my first 5 years. I'm going to keep my withdrawals at or below 4.5% of my starting balance. I'm going to let my portfolio stabilize and recover from any early turbulence. And then, at 70 or 72, when I know where I stand, I'm going to reassess. If I can afford to spend more then, I will. That 5-year discipline could be the difference between 20 years of comfort and 20 years of worry. Let me give you some practical boundaries. If you're withdrawing more than 5% of your retirement savings in any of your first 5 years, you're in the danger zone. Not catastrophic necessarily, but risky. If you're withdrawing 6% or more, you're really gambling with sequence risk. And this includes everything. The cruise, the new car, the help for the kids, the home renovation. All of it adds up to your withdrawal rate. You can't mentally separate spending on me from helping family from one-time expenses. Your portfolio doesn't distinguish. It only sees money leaving. Now here's something else to consider. The first years of retirement are also when your income picture becomes clear. You find out what your actual Social Security check is. You understand your pension, if you have one. You see what Medicare actually covers and what it doesn't. You learn your real cost of living without a paycheck covering the gaps. This is the discovery phase. You're learning how retirement actually feels, not how you imagined it would feel. And almost everyone discovers that something costs more than they expected, usually healthcare, sometimes property taxes, often helping family members who are struggling. If you've already overspent in years 1 and 2, you have no flexibility when these discoveries happen in years 3 and 4. You're locked into a spending level your portfolio can't sustain, and cutting back feels like failure. But if you've been careful early, these discoveries are just adjustments. You can accommodate them without panic because you built in margin. Here's what I saw happen to people who ignored this. They spent their 60s living like they did when they had a salary. Big vacations, new cars every few years, generous gifts to family, restaurant meals 3 times a week. And somewhere around age 73 or 74, they'd come into an advisor's office, or they'd log into their account late at night and realize the money wasn't going to make it. Not that they'd run out next year, but that if they kept going at this pace, they'd run out by 83. And they were planning to live to 90, maybe 95. Now they're faced with cutting their lifestyle by 30% or 40% at an age when they should be settling into comfort, not scrambling to economize. They're selling the house they wanted to age in. They're telling their grandchildren they can't help with college after all. They're skipping medications because the copays add up. That's what overspending in the first years leads to, not immediate disaster. Slow motion disaster 10 or 15 years later, when you have fewer options and less energy to rebuild. Let me tell you what the alternative looks like. You retire at 65 with $700,000. You decide you're going to be disciplined for 5 years. You keep your spending at $30,000 to $32,000 annually from your portfolio, well under 5%. You supplement with Social Security. You still travel, but you choose the $8,000 trip instead of the $25,000 cruise. It's not deprivation. It's strategy. 5 years later, you're 70. Your portfolio, even with modest market returns and despite those early withdrawals, is at $720,000. It's had time to grow. Those early conservative withdrawals gave it breathing room. Now you can reassess. Maybe you can safely increase to $35,000 or even $40,000 annually. Maybe you can take that bigger trip. Maybe you can help a grandchild. You've earned this increased spending not through luck, but through discipline during the vulnerable years. And now you can enjoy your mid-70s with actual security, not anxiety disguised as enjoyment. Here's the psychological shift that needs to happen. Retirement isn't a finish line where all the rules change and you can finally do whatever you want. Retirement is a 20 to 30-year financial commitment that requires as much planning as the 30 years before it. Maybe more, because you can't fix mistakes with more working years. The first 5 years aren't the finally free years. They're the foundation years. What you build in those 5 years, through careful withdrawals and respect for sequence risk, determines everything that follows. Think about it this way. Would you build a house by splurging on the most expensive finishes and furniture before you'd properly reinforce the foundation? Of course not. But that's exactly what aggressive early spending does to your retirement. It decorates the house before ensuring it won't collapse. Now let me address something you might be thinking. But what if I don't make it to 80? What if I'm being careful now and I miss out on experiences I'll never get to have? That's real. That's a legitimate concern. Nobody knows how much time they have. But here's what I'd ask you to consider. What's the more likely scenario? That you die unexpectedly before 75, making your early caution seem wasteful? Or that you live to 85 or 90, making your early discipline seem essential? The actuarial data is clear. If you're healthy enough to retire at 65, you've got a very good chance of making it to 85. Women especially, you're likely looking at late 80s, early 90s. Sequence of returns risk isn't a theoretical problem. It's a mathematical reality that affects the majority of retirees who live normal lifespans. You're not being careful for some unlikely scenario. You're being careful for the most probable outcome. And here's something else. The retirees I knew who were careful early didn't seem miserable or deprived in their 60s. They seemed calm. They traveled, just more thoughtfully. They enjoyed life, just without the constant background anxiety about whether they could afford it. The ones who spent aggressively early, they looked happy in their 60s. But by their mid-70s, many of them looked worried. Really worried. Because the math was catching up and there was no way to outrun it. Let me give you one more scenario to consider. You're 66. You've been retired for a year. Your brother-in-law just bought a $75,000 RV and is planning a year-long road trip. Your neighbor is building a pool. Your friend from work took a $30,000 European vacation. You're feeling the pressure. Everyone else is spending. You don't want to be the careful one, the boring one, the one who can't enjoy retirement. This is the moment that determines your next 20 years. You can join the spending, feel good for a few years, and hope the market cooperates. Or you can remember what I'm telling you now. The first 5 years are different. They're not forever, just 5 years. The most financially dangerous 5 years of your life. After that, after you've let your portfolio stabilize, after you've survived whatever market volatility hit in those vulnerable early years, after you know your real cost of living, then you can reassess. Then you can spend more if the numbers support it. But not now. Not in year 1 or 2 or 3 when sequence risk is highest and you don't yet know what retirement actually costs you. Here's what I want you to do. If you're already retired and you've been overspending, this isn't about guilt or regret. It's about recalibration. Calculate your current withdrawal rate. If it's over 5%, especially over 6%, that's your signal to pull back before it becomes unfixable. If you're about to retire, build your first 5-year budget now. Be honest about what you actually need versus what you want. Give yourself permission to want things. Just sequence them properly. The $25,000 cruise can wait until year 6. The new car can wait until year 5. The major gift to your kids can wait until you see how your portfolio performs in the critical early years. This isn't forever. It's strategic patience during the most vulnerable window. Your future self at 75 or 80 or 85 is depending on the decisions you make now. That person can't go back to work. They can't recover from early overspending with more earning years. They can only live with the consequences of what you decide today. You've spent 30 or 40 years building this retirement fund. The smart play is to protect it fiercely for the first 5 years. Let it stabilize and grow despite your withdrawals. And then, only then, increase your spending when you actually know you can afford it for the long haul. The first years of retirement aren't the reward years. They're the foundation years. Build that foundation right, and the reward comes later, lasting longer and feeling better because it's built on security instead of hope. That's the truth that Wall Street won't emphasize and that financial media won't tell you because it's not exciting. But it's the truth that determines whether you're comfortable at 85 or desperate at 75. Your future self is counting on you to get this right. Not next year, not when it feels easier. Right now, in these critical early years when the math matters most.